Howdy, it's me again, your instructor. Now, I want to assure you, first of all, that while I wore this same shirt in a video about a week ago, it has been washed in the interim. Let's see. Okay, so here's the deal. I want to get ahead of the game. I want to make sure that you've got all the videos ready even before you're ready to watch them. So now we're going to do institutionalism. It's the next school of thought. Let me show you here. I'm about to get up and move here and wake up the computer. I've got hooked up to the TV here. And this is the first school of thought on exam 3. Whoops, forgot my own password. Yes, there it goes. Okay, good. And let me show you the study questions here. Okay, there are the first ones. And let me have a look here at the monitor, make sure that's clear. No, it's not. Let me now zoom this in a little bit better. Like that. Ah, lovely. Okay. In fact, I may zoom a little bit more. And then up a little bit, over that way. Okay. So, these are the first study questions for institutionalism. Let me tell y'all, first of all, that whenever you see on your study questions something like this, like it says PowerPoint right there, that's only a reminder to me that I have a PowerPoint that I can show at this point, because what happened was over the years I've made these PowerPoints and I totally forget that I have them. So that is not an indication that you get the answers to these study questions from there. In fact, you never get answers to study questions from a PowerPoint. It's always either from lecture or the book. Okay, so this school of thought here is going to be, let's see, 89 through, and let's slide on down here. 89 through 95 are the lecture questions, and then we've got reading questions from 96 to 103, and then a video you have to watch. Oh, and then a really interesting article by one of my professors at the real UT in Knoxville. And then we move on to New Institutionalism. And by the way, I believe that, if I'm not mistaken, those are our last lecture questions. Yes, they are. So going back to this up here, to the institutionalist questions, these first ones right here, 89 through 95, those are the last lecture questions. Now, obviously, I'm going to talk about other stuff, because that's what you paid for. But I'm not actually going to have any more of the lecture questions. So, what that means is, you can go ahead and knock out all of the study questions, save 89 through, I think, 95 was the next one. You can get all those knocked out. And I don't know what it's like in your other classes. I'm trying to make it to where we haven't changed hardly anything in here, and you can get on it and not have to wait around for me to tell you what to do. All right, institutionalism. Now, I've made a few notes. First of all, I'm going to read something to you here out of the book. Let's see, what shall I put up on here for you to look at while I'm talking? I'll put up the PowerPoint with Thorsten Veblen. I believe it's this one. There he is, good old Thorsten, all right, the unintentional founder of institutionalism. He didn't mean to found anything, he was just saying what he thought made sense. By the way, this is the only American school of thought, all right, the only truly American school of thought. Ooh, hey, you know what I just noticed? That glare right there in the middle. Maybe while I'm focusing on the screen, I'll turn that off. Oh, what a genius. All right. Now, every other school of thought we've done has originated in another country, one of them European ones for the most part. Well, I believe entirely one of them European ones. This guy was an American. And this was an extremely popular school of thought in the United States. In fact, the several presidents of the American Economics Association were institutionalists. If you've heard of the National Bureau of Economic Research, that is the research institute that determines whether or not we're in an expansion or a recession. So it's a very important group, and it was founded by institutionalists. So, a great deal of early work done by them. At one point, it appeared that they might become the dominant school of thought in the United States, but that didn't happen. Now, let me read to you something from a sort of classic work in an institutionalist, and you're going to say, oh my God, that doesn't even sound like economics. The institutional structure, this is on the first page of the chapter in the book. The institutional structure of any society incorporates two systems of value, the ceremonial and the instrumental, each of which has its own logic and method of validation. While these two value systems are inherently incompatible, They are intertwined within the institutional structure through a complex set of relationships. What the heck? That doesn't sound the least bit like anything we've talked about under neoclassicism, under Marxism, under Austrian, under post-Keynesian. Nothing about investment, nothing about employment, all this kind of stuff, right? Well, the way they're leaning here in this school of thought and is the idea that the value structure undergirding and legitimizing a particular economic system is the most important thing to study, all right? If you remember, going back to the institutionalists, going back to the neoclassicals and the Austrians and to some extent the Marxists, there's this idea that economic systems are natural, all right? That really once we have figured out an economic system in the United States, then we know how the economic system works in Brazil because economics is natural. Right? It's a part of our genetic makeup. The institutionalists are outright rejecting that concept. They're saying, no, it's not. We made this crap up just like we made up our political system, just like we make up religions, except for the one true right religion. And so on and so on. So they're going to focus more on the underlying value system. And I think let's see, should I jump to that next? The very core thing to bear in mind with this is that they're coming from the perspective of Homo sapiens are social animals, all right? We're pack animals. We by instinct want to hang out with other Homo sapiens. It is an evolutionary advantage to hang out with other Homo sapiens. You're probably wanting to look at me some now, and not just that thing right there. I'm looking at my monitor right there, and there I am. So, what was I telling you? Oh yeah, that Homo sapiens are social animals, that they desperately want to feel like they are members of a group, that it's important for us to be members of a group because Homo sapiens don't survive well on their own, as we're all finding out right now, as we're cut off from everyone else on the planet. So every bit as much as food, shelter, and clothing, we want to feel membership with a tribe. And one of the most important things about that is a set of shared values. And sometimes these values are insane. There was a professor that retired recently from TCU, Andy Fort, and he taught religion. And when he said one of his themes was that it is unbelievable what people will believe. But they'll believe some crazy crap just in order to feel like they are close to other people. I have an anecdote along those lines. Okay. Back when I was in college, I was walking towards my dorm, and I'm carrying my notebook, and some girl stopped me and said, hey, how are you? And so I was really excited that a girl was talking to me. So I said, fine, thanks, how are you? And then it turned out she was a member of a religious group that people essentially believe is a cult. She's Catholic. No, just kidding. She was a member of the Unitarian Church. What's it called? Not Unitarian, I'm sorry. It's the Reverend Sung Myung Moon in South Korea who claimed to be the second coming of Christ. All right, it was his group. People called them the Moonies because his last name was Moon. All right, so unfortunately, my phone number was written on my notebook, and she got my phone number. So she starts calling me. And I say, no, thanks very much, I'm not interested. She wanted me to go down to their house and learn about their religion. And then I finally thought, what the heck? This is the last time in my life that I have this much freedom and so little responsibility, relatively speaking. So then I'll go see what a cult is like. I had no desire whatsoever to join, but it's kind of like I'm going to go undercover and see what this is like. So I went down there. All right. So first of all, there were 3 of us that they were trying to convert. Let's see. Yeah, 3 of us that they were trying to convert, and the other 2 guys were extremely shy. All right. They had us all help prepare a meal and sing a song and stuff like that. And I was like, yeah, whatever. I'm happy to do all this stuff. So then we get around to the part where, it was all very pleasant, we get around to the part where the person that was in charge pulled out a whiteboard like this. Oh, it's already there in shot. Pulled out a whiteboard and started sketching out for us how their religion worked. Well, I kept asking questions. Hey, well, what about this? What about this? They very nicely threw me out and said, well, we have to study now. So I had to go. But this is where this is heading. The other 2 guys wanted to go back. And that really hit me. I was like, oh my God, these guys are just lonely. They're just desperate for any companionship whatsoever. They would have, if the chess club had brought them out, then they would have joined the chess club. If it had been the Baptist, they'd have joined the Baptist. But it was the Moonies. And they wanted to come back again and visit. And this is, I guess, a manifestation of this huge desire to want to be a member of a group even if it's insane. By the way, they never bothered me again. I saw them on the streets, we were pleasant to each other, and they never asked me again, so I kind of appreciated that. Okay, so let's get into some of the more formal stuff here. Why is it that Veblen, all of a sudden, let's go back to Veblen over here. Why is it that Veblen is coming at things, I'm going to back out just a little bit. Oops, that's the opposite direction. Why is it that Veblen is coming at things from such a different direction? All right. Hey, I've even got one of these things here that changes the slide remotely. All right. This is why you went to TCU and not A&M. It's just this exciting technology that the professors have in their own homes, let alone at TCU. Okay. So what was it that meant him, that led him to such a different approach than anyone else had taken so far in economics? Well, it's kind of hard to take the approach he did if the foundations hadn't already existed. Think back when I told you about the foundations of neoclassicism. Let's see. Let me, in fact, grab that, and I'll go over it real quick again. Here's Marx. I'll go back to that in a second. The foundations of neoclassicism, what we have here was natural law, Cartesian deductivism, and political individualism. And these were all very popular ideas in Adam Smith's day, and he ends up adopting them and making them part of his analysis. And then when we got to Marx, we said that when Marx was writing, things that really influenced him were Hegelian philosophy, the abuses of the Industrial Revolution, and classical/neoclassical economics. All right, with the Austrians, they did the same thing. Well, this is what we're talking about here. That when Veblen is writing, and this is at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, these are things that had evolved that really hadn't existed before. Right, the discipline of anthropology. And by the way, this is the answer to study question number. I'm almost there. I think it's 89. Yes, this is the answer to 89 right here. So, the discipline of anthropology, the idea that Homo sapiens depend more heavily on learned than instinctive behavior. And institutionalists said, yeah, this makes sense. Or Veblen and his followers, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. We're going to stop putting, as the Austrians did, the individual at the center of our analysis, and instead put the culture at the center of their analysis. That no, and this is strongly opposed to the Austrian view, that no, people don't just make up their own minds based on their own personal desires, that these are heavily influenced by the rest of the society because Homo sapiens are social animals, right? Second, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in just a second. Second here, evolution, all right? So Darwin's Origin of Species, where's my phone? I was going to look up when it was published. 1869? I don't remember now. I don't know where my phone is. But anyway, that this came out, not long before Veblen is writing, and the whole idea that the structure of biological systems evolve in response to various pressures, well then heck, I'll bet that, I misspelled weather. I'll bet that economic systems do the same thing, is what Veblen and his followers are thinking, right? So now we got the idea of that no, it's not just this system, say for example in the neoclassical or the Austrian, that, well, we have capitalism and that's just it. Or now Marx did have a concept of evolution, but it was very clearly laid out. We're just going to go from this to this to this to this. They're not saying that. They're saying we don't know where it's going any more than we know what the next species of bird is going to be. But we do know that it's going to be impacted by changes in environmental pressures, all right, and selection. So they're saying that economic systems evolve over time, and there's no reason to believe that the system that we have in the United States is in any way directly comparable to that in Brazil. It may be. It may be that it turns out that they're very similar, but that's something we shouldn't assume. It's something we should analyze and try to figure out, all right? Then down here on pragmatism, okay, so what you've got so far here is that, Homo sapiens are heavily influenced by culture. Culture can change over time. Well, how do we go about recommending policy? How do we go about saying this is a good idea and that's a bad idea? Do we basically say, that's the way you do it in your culture, don't worry about it, that's just fine? No. Actually, they say that there are things that are a good idea and things that are a bad idea. Now, how do you determine what the good policies are? You determine them via realized consequences. What that means is, hey, did it work or not? Let's say you're a farmer and you're wanting to increase crop yield and you tried something in 2 different fields. Well, which one worked better? Well, that's how we figure out the truth. And the truth here meaning, the most efficient way of raising crops or whatever. And so you have to have a goal in mind. I'm trying to increase my crop yield. Okay, all right, we got a goal. Now we try different methods and see which one works the best. It's a very experimental school of thought. The idea that policy should be experimental, especially because of the evolution part, that the policy that works today might not work tomorrow. All right, so we've got to go through and figure out, hey buddy, did you want to say hello to everybody? All right, there he is. Oh, good Lord, now he wants attention. The way it worked, yesterday may not work today, and so it's a very experimental thing. All right, well, let me glance at my notes here. I think I know what I was going to do next, but, here they are. I'm not 100% sure. I will, will I do that next? I think I've changed my mind about what I was going to do next. All right, now, what I'm going to do now is read to you, because one of the things that's really hard about this school of thought, okay, I'm going to put the camera back over this way. I did not learn this school of thought in graduate school or undergraduate. In fact, all I really learned was neoclassicism. Now, a bunch of my instructors, is that me? Yeah, it is, all right. A bunch of my instructors were institutionalists, which I didn't know. I didn't know what the heck that was. But when I got out to TCU in 1987, I got to thinking, well, some of the professors I admired the most were institutionalists, and I don't really know what it's about, so I spent several years trying to figure it out, and it's really hard, all right? It is so different from the other schools of thought that you have to have a major shift in the way you think, and not just about economics, but about our culture, and the idea of what is right and wrong, and that the idea that there are so many things that are culturally relative that we take as natural, right? And a couple of years ago, good Lord, probably 30 years ago, I started reading this to my students. When you were invited to an American home, right? Not the whole thing, but some selections here. Because what I want to show you is, this is a book that was handed out to some foreign visitors. Melanie found this when she worked at the Hilton in Knoxville. And this is to help them understand American culture. Well, that's fascinating. A book on understanding American culture, because if they point it out in here, there's stuff in here you're going to think to yourself, doesn't everybody do that? And they don't. And it turns out that a lot of the things you do are really weird, all right? Especially right now that you're trapped in the house. And so I'm going to go through this and show you some things here that they had to point out back in 1980. How old is this book? It doesn't have a date, but it's at least 1984. 1984. Look, genius, 1984. All right. Oh, by the way, let me show you this too. On the back, it's got Dr. Sam Bostaff and a bunch of information about, this was my very first job interview out of grad school with the University of Dallas. And Dr. Bostaff, one of the people that read the Austrian chapter for me, was the first person to interview me. So I've known him for a very long time. Very, very nice man. I did not get that job, which is really good because TCU was a much better job. As a matter of fact, one of the people that was in that department, after I got the TCU job, called me up and said, hey, I was wanting you to get a job, but you're much better off at TCU. Now, let's see here. Most Americans live in a nuclear family. Okay. The point at which a casual comment becomes a firm commitment to visit someone's home varies from culture to culture. In the United States, if an American says, we must get together sometime, or perhaps we could meet on Tuesday, and then in parentheses for the slow-witted foreign visitor, it also says, or Wednesday or Thursday. It's not always Tuesday. His friend agrees, very sexist book, by the way, a firm commitment has not been made. However, if that person names a specific date and time, for example, how would you like to come to dinner on Tuesday at 6? And his friend accepts, the American host assumes that a firm commitment has been made and the friend will arrive on Tuesday at 6. I guess there's a culture where that's not really true. Otherwise, they wouldn't. By the way, it's underlined to make sure you realize, don't be saying you're going to go to somebody's house and then not show up. All right? Probably happened all the time back before this book came out. Let's see. Okay. All right. Once an invitation has been accepted, the commitment to attend is regarded as a firm obligation to be respected by both guest and host, even if other invitations, see, he wants me to throw this. Very classic dog, it's a bone. I'm going to throw it out the door, see if he runs after it. All right. So even if you get better invitations for later in the day, you're still supposed to go to the one that you promised to go to. All right. Who is invited? Unless the host indicates otherwise, an invitation is only for that person. Americans usually prepare for a specific number of guests and often plan to have a similar number of male and female guests. We've never done that, but I guess somebody does. Therefore, for a dinner guest to arrive with one or two unannounced friends is considered impolite and embarrassing. Now, I've been reading this out for years, right? And on some of these things, I've been like, well, okay, I can understand how that would happen. On this one, I never understood. And one of our former students, one of our graduates now, she's a lawyer now, Ujala Rashid, she said, oh, I know what that is. She said, where her family is from, when you invite someone over for dinner, they may have an extended family living with them. So they may end up showing up with Grandma and Uncle Bob as well as them, and you know this. You're prepared for this, all right? So in the U.S., we're not prepared for that. So, and as a matter of fact, she said it was kind of funny that her parents have lived over here so long that they now find that very annoying when their new friends, I can't remember if they're from Bangladesh or Pakistan. I think Bangladesh. Anyway, they find it very annoying that the new immigrants will then end up bringing over 10 friends, and they're like, yeah, we didn't expect that. All right. Let's see. Punctuality, highly valued trait in American character. As a matter of fact, okay, so Dr. Quinn, I believe it was Dr. Quinn, told the story of one of his professors was going to present a paper at a econ department in Germany. And let's say the paper was supposed to be presented at 3 o'clock. So the professor shows up at 2:30. There's nobody in the room. 2:45. There's still nobody. 3 o'clock. He's still the only one sitting in the room. 3:15, he's like, I must be in the wrong room. Finally, about 3:20, 3:25, people start wandering in. Oh, here in Germany, we mean, when we say 3, we mean 3:30. But you would think the exact opposite about Germans, wouldn't you? All right, so, but anyway, as long as everyone knows the rules, it's okay. The problem is when not everyone's clear on the rules. All right, should the host family provide transportation, it is not uncommon for a woman from the household to arrive alone to escort a guest to the family home, where guests from nations where women are secluded from male guests might be surprised and even titillated by this. I made the last part up. But in the United States, it's perfectly appropriate, no romantic meaning. Okay, I've heard this one before too. Americans usually entertain simply and informally. Hosts often will say, make yourself at home. This is meant to be a positive, welcoming statement. I remember reading one time a foreigner thinking that making myself at home, I thought I was going to be a guest here. Well, have I got to go make up my own meal and stuff like that? So no, that's a welcoming statement in this culture. Okay, the picnic, I should say the cookout, but the picnic is one of the most popular ways for Americans to entertain in the summertime. The main focus of such an event is the manner in which the food is prepared. Meat, most often chicken, pork, or beefsteak, is grilled out of doors on a charcoal fire. Often a male is in charge of cooking and tending the fire. And the party centers around this activity. Okay, so, I was born in England, so I got a bunch of English relatives. And I guess I was 19 one time when we went back to visit, and I was talking to a second cousin or whatever who was also about the same age as me. And I said, well, what do you think of when you think of the United States? And he says he thought of cookouts and drive-in movies. So, well, I got bad news. We don't have any drive-in movies anymore, but we still have cookouts all the time. And this is how American apparently that is. Now, it's much more widespread now than it used to be, but my cousin, who is the customer service manager on the Jubilee line, the Wembley Park Stadium tube station. That's the one where the massive Wembley Stadium is outside of that tube station. So when they do the American football in London, that's where they play. So it's packed that I guess Sunday. They probably still do it on Sunday, coming out there. Well, he told me one time, we have all these grills set up for people to tailgate before the game, to cook out. I was like, yes, that's very American. All right, let's see here. Dress for most evenings is informal. Men and women who are not members of the same family converse in public and share meals together. And actually that is very taboo in many cultures. Okay, many Americans have household animals or pets which are allowed to stay in all parts of the house, including the kitchen. Dogs and cats in a home are treated almost like members of the family. The following points should be kept in mind. 1, by law, they should be inoculated against contagious diseases. 2, owners take their animals to the vet on a regular basis. And 3, they are generally tame and friendly enough to be with small children as well as small adults. That's made part of that up too. I'm going to close the door because my allergies are starting to bother me. Or is it something else? I had it open because that way the dog could just let himself in and out and I wouldn't have to worry about it. Let's see here. Okay, here's another good one. Here's another good one. Another feature. Let's see here. There's a couple of things here about if you don't know which fork to use, don't worry, nobody else knows either. Just copy them. Here's a. Yeah, this is it. Okay. All right. First of all, this is boxed off as a special point they're making here, that guests may compliment the hostess on her cooking if they wish to do so. So there's a culture in which that would be a faux pas. That's French. To say something nice about the meal that was just cooked. That's really weird, isn't it? But anyway. Now, seconds, parentheses, a second helping of food might only be offered once to a guest. And they then go on to, in a special boxed note, to go on about this. In many American homes, the host refrains from offering the food more than a second time for fear of offending the guest by his persistence. International visitors who are accustomed to refusing the second helping a number of times should realize that you're going to be really hungry by the end of the night. All right, and you know, I got to think about that. I remember when we would go to Melanie's grandparents for Thanksgiving, and like food all over the table, right? And you've just stuffed yourself with turkey and stuffing, and then Granny wants to know if you want a piece of cake or pie. Oh no, that's oh come on, no. Oh okay, and so I mean it's almost like a ritual, but we don't generally do that. So over here, if you say that you don't want it, like okay, fair enough, end of that. All right, American men often assist women with food preparation and cleaning tasks. The traditional concept of men's work and women's work is changing. Let's say, oh, get this one. All right. Some Americans offer to take their international guests on a house tour. Some visitors regard this as an impolite gesture intended to allow Americans to display their material wealth, which is, I mean, I guess if you're from a developing country, but it's not really that much different in the other country. Let me turn that light on too, because actually it's hooked to a fan and I'm getting warm. Probably one of the symptoms of coronavirus. Let's see. Now, my mother, who grew up in England, finds it really weird when somebody asks if you want to look around their house. Melanie, meanwhile, is already looking around their house before they've even noticed that she's gone, all right? Because she loves seeing the other rooms, how they're set up and so forth. But my mother finds it intrusive. It would almost be like in British culture, if, hey, would you like to see the drawer where I keep my socks? Down here's my underwear. I said, well, yeah, that's great. Good for you. But I don't really need to know that. So another thing about, okay, so it'll come up here a second. All right. Okay, man, I wish we were in class for this one. I always like to do a little quiz on this one. What do you think the number one topic that foreigners talk about, that Americans start, I'm sorry, let me just read it to you. Let's see here. There are 3 ways in which to start a conversation in America that are commented on by many visitors. Number 1 is the weather, all right? And I thought, well, why isn't the weather the number 1 topic in every country, you know? And then I got to thinking, what if you lived in Egypt? Hot, ain't it? Well, hell yes, it's hot. We live in Egypt. Or what if you're in Vietnam during the monsoon season? Boy, it's been raining. Yeah, it has. And thanks for reminding me. All right. So whereas we have a much more temperate climate, here in Texas, there can be radical changes from day to day. So it is an interesting topic of conversation. But foreign visitors talk about that as being the number 1 subject that Americans will bring up for conversation. Let's see. Americans almost always talk about the weather when they wish to find a topic common to all guests. The weather, of course, is relatively neutral. What relatively neutral? I know. And a safe subject that generally does not stir the emotions, but I love rain. Anyway, let's see. Okay. Questions about an international guest country, even when they may seem terribly obvious to the guest, indicate a desire to find out more about the visitor. So please don't make fun of them. My mother has been asked, do they have trees in England? I don't know if you saw that Robin Hood movie or not, but it's Sherwood Forest, not Sherwood Plain. Somebody asked her once if they had televisions in England. Yeah, they invented them there, and then they gave one to the Queen, but then nobody else has one. All right, so yes, they have televisions there. All right. Questions regarding occupation. This is a good one here. Are only asked out of interest, since one's occupation does not necessarily indicate one's social class. Well, that's not entirely true, but it's just not as big a deal. It's a deal, but it's not as big a deal in the U.S. It is if you're sitting next to somebody on an airplane in the U.S., another American, and you started a little bit of a conversation, it might not be unusual, I guess, well, what do you do for a living? and that would be a search for common topics. It would not be an impolite question. It is in England. I was sitting next to a woman on a flight here in the U.S. Going from Dallas-Fort Worth to New Orleans for a conference, and she was English. And I got to talking about stuff like this. And I said, for example, I knew not to ask you what you did for a living. And she said, it's funny you should say that. Because on her flight from New Orleans to Dallas, she was going back to New Orleans, there was an American sitting next to her, and she had out a bunch of papers. It was floor plans for her house and so forth. And he says, I'm going to do a stupid Texan accent, he says, hey, what you do for a living? You an architect? And she says, no. But that's it. She's not going to help him, because that was rude. In her mind, it was rude to ask her what she did for a living. Now, what she did for a living was she had a PhD in psychology. She was a psychologist, so it wasn't really something she was ashamed of. But she nevertheless thought that was a very intrusive question. Interior designer? No. And that's it. All right, so the idea of what is an appropriate question varies from country to country. Is that coming up? Okay, yeah, all right. Although Americans enjoy lively discussions and are open about a wide variety of subjects, most are uncomfortable discussing what we consider to be, by U.S. standards, private or personal matters. Number one, private or personal matter, how much money you earn, which is interesting because the international sort of stereotype of Americans is they're all, hey, how much money you make. We don't want to talk about that, right? That's not something that we feel comfortable with. How old you are. There's a great Saturday Night Live skit. What's that guy's name? Matt Damon. Matt Damon's out on a date, all right? And he's saying to the girl, what are you, like 45? I'm 23. He also then asks her how much she weighs and stuff like that. Anyway, why they have few or no children. Now, this may have been only peculiar to the Korean students in my class when I was in the graduate program at Tennessee, but they were very concerned that Melanie and I didn't have any children. Why don't you have any children? It's like, well, I'm not going to go into detail, but we ain't done that. All right, so let's see. Cost of their personal possessions. Unspoken communication. Eye contact with women or elders. The willingness to look people in the eye, regardless of sex or age, is regarded as, and then they underline it, very positive. The reverse. Avoiding eye contact is regarded as a sign that one is trying to hide the truth. You may well already be aware that there are many cultures in which it would be rude to maintain eye contact with people in certain social classes and of certain ages. And yet to us, my gosh, that's a sort of basic element of any honest, open conversation, is that you're maintaining eye contact. So you can imagine the kind of international problems that can be created like this. This is not exactly the same thing, but I read one time that when LBJ went to South Vietnam to sort of try to buck up the, I don't know if it was Diem or which president it was, but he's got his arm around this South Vietnamese leader, and as this is my good buddy. Well, the way it was interpreted in the culture was, this is my little friend, if you see what I mean. That it was putting him down and making him smaller than LBJ, rather than what LBJ was trying to do is say, we're equals. Let's see. The use of the left hand in passing foods or making toasts. Americans give no significant or negative meaning to this. Apparently in some cultures, traditionally the left hand was reserved